Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Strength in Numbers webinar series hosted by 1080 Motion. I'll be one of your co-hosts, Adam Rolfe, along with Ola Eriksrud, who will be helping us with the questions at the end. Please put your questions in the chat and we will get to as many as we can today. We are super excited to have everyone back along with us again for another episode of this. Two great speakers. So what we're going to be talking about, baseball specific speed development. So we're really going to dig into this sports specific niche. And we're going to bring on camera here in a second, Kevin Hollabaugh and Josh McDaniel. These are two awesome coaches we've gotten to work with 1080 Motion for the last year and a half. And we're excited to have them join us today in speaking baseball specific speed. Now, don't forget, this is part one. Next week, we're going to do part two, same time, same place. So please tell your friends. Share it. I think there's some really good content, and we're going to work a little bit more on acceleration next time we're speaking, but they'll point that out. So without further ado, our guys out of Cincinnati, Ohio, Kevin and Josh, I'll let you guys take the show. Kevin, good to see you, bud.
Adam, thank you so much. So my name's Kevin Hollabaugh. I am the owner and program director of ProFORCE Sports Performance here in Cincinnati, Ohio. My co-presenter is, I'll let him introduce himself. He's on camera too.
How's it going, everyone? I'm Josh McDaniel. I'm the performance manager here at ProFORCE Sports Performance. I'm happy to be here, happy to present with Kevin, and ready to get into it.
Yeah, so we are really, I went too fast. There we go. All right, so we're really excited. Thanks again to Adam and Peter for asking us to present on this topic. We train a lot of baseball players here in the Cincinnati area, and we've had our 1080 sprint for a little over a year now, so we've been able to utilize it, dive into a bunch of data. And thanks again to my staff, like Josh. He brings great content and challenges me every single day to make sure that my A game's up and brings new concepts to the table. And one quote that I wanted to share with everybody, and I share it in all of my speed agility talks, is really movement is the language of how we express power. And the reason I put this in all the talks is ever since I've heard this quote, and if anybody knows who actually said it, please correct me. I can't remember who said it, but I love this quote because ever since I heard it, we've really at ProFORCE taken our speed agility program and tried to break it down to where we're teaching it as a language, right? We're trying to teach each athlete how to express power. And we believe in it so strongly that even when a parent comes into our facility and says, tell us about your speed and agility program, I'll even tell them the quote. I'll tell them, well, we're going to teach, we try to teach speed and agility as a language. And that allows our staff and me, when we're programming it, to really think about how we're going to break it down to the little level that each athlete can learn it, just like it was to be taught in school as math or history or any other subject. So I'm just obsessed with that quote. But for today's slides, if you guys want to take a minute and take a picture of this one, if you scan this, it'll take you to our website. You'll be able to download the slides, so then you don't have to worry about taking copious notes or anything like that or trying to keep up with us. And then today's information is really just from 18 plus years of learning in this field. I think far too often in this field, we're quick to chastise other people and their thoughts and their concepts. And I'm not one to really do that a whole lot. I'm one to take stuff in, learn. And I'm very much like Mike Boyle. I'm always willing to change my mind if I decide to at any point. And we have changed our minds a lot, especially since we've gotten to 1080. So take a picture of that. That'll get you the slides. We can come back to that later if we need to. So really our talk. So when Adam and Peter asked me to do a baseball specific speed presentation, we looked at the scope of what we had to present to you guys. And I asked if I could have two talks, because really what we're going to do today is really dive into the baseball specific aspects of speed development. And then part two that we're going to do next week is going to be a lot longer, a lot more detail. This is going to be more on how we teach speed qualities. We're going to define the physical tools of acceleration and max velocity. And then we're going to dive into how we teach the technical skills of acceleration and max velocity, and then how we apply the right stimulus in our program design for a speed program. So we're excited to share both parts with you guys. And today is just going to be a little bit shorter than part two, but it's really going to be really important if you're working with baseball specific athletes. So when we started this talk, I looked at Josh and I said, well, let's back up. We train these guys all the time, but what do baseball players need, right? So let's look at it from that aspect. Let's start there. Just like any good program design, we want to look at where we need to be when we finish and then work backwards. So what do baseball players need? They need to be able to start really, really well. When we look at baseball as a sport, right, we're pretty much always starting from an athletic base, and we're always starting from more of a stock position. Very rarely in baseball are we doing stuff where we see in football or on field-based sports where we're starting and stopping, we're decelerating and re-accelerating constantly, right? Now, there's a little bit of motion to every step, right? Like infielders take steps to get ready, 1, 2, 3, get down. Same thing in the outfield, a little bit smaller. And there's different positional needs for each base. But overall, we need to be really, really good at starting well and redirecting ourselves in different positions. So our acceleration skills need to be incredibly strong, which we'll dive more into that in part 2. Today's going to be more of the focus on learning how to start well. They need to be able to curve a linear run, all right? And they need to be able to do that really well, because when we're rounding the bases, obviously that's more of a curved linear run, an arch run. And they do need to be able to run at max velocities when we're talking about going to showcases or tryouts, those sort of things. So it's a really interesting sport to work with, because we live so far on the acceleration paradigm that when we ask them to do max velocity skill sets, typically they're pretty poor or they're bad at it. So it's something that we have to take time to train and specifically work on for those athletes that have poor max velocity skill sets, which once again, this will be touched on more in part 2. Okay. So for starting positions, when we look at this, right, we have our athletic stance, which I touched on. This is going to be the position that the majority of baseball players are going to use, whether defensively or whether they're on the base path offensively. It's kind of the base of where we want to start and stop from when we're looking at this. When we're talking base stealing specifically, one of the things we're going to go over in this presentation is what we teach, which is the drop step, okay? And then last but not least is we look at the 60-yard setup. So we have a laser start, we have a hand start, and we have a laser gate start, which are the 3 specific ways that we've seen different showcases take their 60-yard time. And what we're going to do is kind of break all these down for you. And our athletes, when we teach speed and agility, just so you guys know from the onset, we denote each of these as different starting techniques when we're teaching our speed and agility program. So then that way, when we say, hey, get in your 60-yard setup, the athlete knows what that is, how that's different than the base stealing stance. What we don't want to do is blur the lines when we're talking about these to where our athletes are now trying to do our 60-yard setup for a base stealing, because they're counterproductive and they're not going to work, okay? So they're a little bit different in every aspect, all right? I'll let Josh here talk in a minute for those of you thinking he's not going to get to talk, but athletic stance, okay? We need to be able to move really, really crisply in multiple planes of direction, right? So from this, we're looking at, I want movement and quality of expression in multiple angles at any given time. So we're not just going to teach the athlete how to move laterally or through that frontal plane, but rather we want to be able to teach them how to move consistently and crisply between the frontal plane, sagittal plane, and the transverse plane. So he has to be able to start and stop and move in and out of those directions very, very crisply, all right? So if we look at this great overhead picture of Josh here, right, he needs to be able to move out of that athletic stance forwards, okay? So if there's a ground ball in front of him, whether it's in the outfield or infield, he needs to be able to effectively charge or change directions and charge that. All right. The next one, we need to be able to move left and right effectively. All right. And these subsequent slides here, we're not really going to touch on this too much because we're going to touch a lot on this when we get into the base stealing segment of this. But think they want to be able to shuffle left and right, right? Infielders might use a crossover step or a crossover run if it's a short ground ball to be able to backhand a ball. But when we're looking at it, typically lateral movement is going to stay fundamentally the same, whether we're looking at a base steal or in and out of those positions. The other aspect, I need to be able to turn and sprint straight back. So if I hit up a line drive over my head and I need to get to the point of it quickly, I need to be able to turn, open my hips, and go backwards efficiently. All right. Then we have our angle runs. So now I need to be able to turn, open my hips, and retreat at 45-degree angles or different angles in between. And then the last one, I need to be able to effectively change directions and move forwards, okay? So the way I look at this is I like calling it a plyo step or redirect step. Every one of those steps that he can push, so he wants to find an angle outside of his hips, and you'll see this in the next video. We teach our athletes kind of jab step, plyo step with that foot outside the hips all right, that's going to allow them to push themselves in a new direction, all right, while clearing their hips. So, Josh, I'm going to let you take this next video breakdown here of Tyler, okay? So Tyler here is going to do a redirect backwards, yeah.
So this is one of our athletes. He's actually a pitcher, so he's not going to be very good at this skill because he doesn't use it a lot. But you'll see in the video, Kevin, go ahead and play the video. So you'll see in the video, he opens the hip, and his first step is actually a push with the left leg. And he gets a little bit too far outside of himself with the right foot. So his right foot's way out in front of his body. Watch it back here again real quick. So he's got a good hip open right here. Right, he gets the hip turned down. But he opens up a little bit too much and over pushes with that left leg. So now when that right foot hits the ground, it's not going to, go back real quick, Kev. When that right foot hits the ground, his timing is going to be a little bit off, and that left leg is still behind him too far where we would normally want to see it. So if we go to the next video now, Kev, what you can see in this video, this is how we like to teach it. So we go with the hip turn, right? We're resetting the feet. So now that foot, the left foot, is under the hip, and we're not over pushing with the right foot, so that now our timing is a little bit better. And you'll see in later videos, and as we go through the next set of slides next week, we'll be able to understand a little bit more about why we want to see this. But we get the foot under the center of mass, and we're not over pushing so that the leg stays behind. We want the thighs to kind of match. We want that thigh timing to get as close together as possible. And that'll make more sense as we go through some of the other videos that we're going to go through.
See if I can get a spot of it. You'll see it more when we get to the base stealing concept. But
this is also a better way that we can really get a shin angle change, which is something we look for and something we'll go over as well. We go over that in a couple of the videos that are on these set of slides, and we go over it a lot next week because it's a big thing we like to see from our athletes is shin angle change. That plyo step, that drop step, whatever you want to call it, it's really going to help out with that timing, and that timing is going to help our athletes get to where they need to go quicker. All right, so right here, this is one of our athletes. He's going to do more of a diagonal run backwards and open up at more of an angle, but he's kind of doing the same thing. So he gets the foot under the center of mass a little bit, but he's still over pushing with that first leg that drop steps. So now his thigh timing is not on as well as we'd like it to be. So you can see right here, he opens up, he gets a good hip turn, he gets that foot to drop under center of mass, but he just waits too long to pick the right foot up off the ground. So what we want to see right here is that over push with the right leg. We want him to, once that leg is done pushing, he's got to pick it up. We don't want him to overextend that leg, because now he's got both feet on the ground and his left leg is actually turning into the turf, which is not what we want to see.
I'll play it full speed one more time.
You can see he's trying to push even though he has the other foot already on the ground, and that's something we try to teach our athletes not to do. So in this slide, you'll see kind of what we're looking for right here. We get the hip to open up, we get the hip turn, we get the plyo step to help reposition the feet so that we can move at an angle. There we go. Plyo step, not an over push, and now we're picking up the foot on the ground before we replace it with the other one. That's a big concept that we have that we try to teach a lot of our athletes, not just our baseball players, but a lot of our athletes, is pick up, replace. So we want the foot on the ground to start to come off the ground before the next foot makes contact with the ground. So that's something that you saw in the last video that athlete wasn't doing. In this video, we tried to emphasize that pick up, replace so that we can really get the thigh timing down to help them throughout the rest of the sprint. So you get the jab step, the drop step, the plyo, whatever you want to call it. And then that foot isn't pushing once the left foot isn't pushing once the right foot hits the ground. It's getting picked up off the ground so that the thigh timing is a little bit better as they get further into their run. we're always trying to get pick up replace.
So I hope that concept kind of makes sense a little bit. We'll dive a lot more into that concept in part 2 and try to break that down a little bit more, because I know that can be a little bit confusing when we're just talking about it on a PowerPoint slide. So I think I found this great picture of an overlay breakdown of how Rickey Henderson steals bases, since he's one of the greatest of all time to do so. So we can see here he's in a good athletic stance. What you're going to see is he's going to get a lateral push with that backside that transfers the center of mass onto the lead leg, his right leg, and then that right leg becomes a push off the left, and then he's going to transfer that into good sprint mechanics. So
you can actually see in the video he's getting from the middle picture to the last picture on the left. You can see the shin angle change that he gets because he's getting that plyo step under center of mass, and he's able to redirect the force that he's producing into more of a horizontal manner.
Yeah. So I just drew this nice little arrow for you guys to show that he's going that way. There's the line under the center of mass where he gets that transfer. And then, like Josh said, you can see the shin angle change there as he's getting to that point. So I'm going to let Josh take this on the next breakdown. We kind of did it through coach's eye, so it might play a little bit slower. So just hang tight. And then, Josh, I'm going to try to pause it for you when those highlights come up so you can hit on those. Okay.
Got it. So this is one of our athletes working on that base stealing plyo step. Something we've been working on with him for a while, and it's not going to be the best because of the shoes that he has on turf. But we're looking at what his right foot's going to do in that plyo step. So that's what we're focused on right now. So as he gets ready to go, that foot's going to get picked up, and he picks it up a little bit too much, honestly, but he gets it under center of mass. So we want to see less of a full step and more just a pick up the foot, get it back to the ground as fast as you can under center of mass.
Yeah, and to that point, he's still pushing off his left leg at this point. So don't think that we're not telling people to push off the left. He's still traveling forwards. So it's not a true like false step where he's not getting any movement going towards the direction he wants to run.
All right, so he's under center mass. And we, just for reference, the 1080 right now doesn't have any weight on it. So he's got about 1 kg there. Okay, this is what I'm talking about with the thigh timing. This right here where the legs are parallel, that's what we ideally, and you're not going to get it perfect at acceleration, but that's ideally what we want to see, as close to that as possible, especially when we get into like the transition phase and the top end speed, which again, we'll go over in the next set of slides next week. But this is the position that we're looking for. That's the thigh timing that we're talking about, right? And he's picking up the foot on the ground before he replaces it with the next one. The thigh timing is better right there.
So we're not just looking for thigh timing, guys, on that first step. It's every step that we're trying to check that thigh timing.
All right. Another thing we'll go over in the next video, I just wanted to look at it right now because this is a really good kind of visual of that, is that ipsilateral running, same side running. A lot of times when we focus on running, we focus on opposite arm, opposite leg. It's something we did for years. And then just from things that we've picked up, people we've learned from, we've learned that you really need to focus on same side shoulder, loading the same side leg. So you can see that right shoulder is actually helping him load that right side leg so that he can then get the shin angle change that we need to produce the horizontal force to help him move forward. All right, and then again, the thigh timing. So once that foot makes contact with the ground, we were actually a little bit ahead of it. So he was behind a little bit, but we're trying to get the thigh timing as close together as possible. Another thing we'll touch on in the next video, just kind of throwing this out there as well to give you guys something to think about, is a lot of what we do is based on the foot and the position of the foot. In this video, you can see he's mainly supinated there. We want to see a little bit of pronation, and then he's going to end in supination as he gets the toe off. Because of the footwear that he has on, he's actually a very flat-footed athlete. He barely has any foot arches. But because of the shoe wear, the footwear that he has on, he wasn't able to get pretty much any pronation there when he's in mid-stance. So that's something that we look for with a lot of our athletes, and you're going to be able to see it really well here. And that kind of correlates into the thigh timing. So if he doesn't get that mid stance, he's going to try and push a little bit more. So now he's going to overextend that leg, and then that leg is going to be behind. So the thigh timing is not going to be where we need it to be.
All right, so this next video, this is going to be one of our big leaguers here. He was back in, what was it, Josh, 2020, because 2021 we had some injury issues, but in 2020 he was the fastest man in Major League Baseball. So this is Adam Engel. He's just doing his setup. This isn't going to be flawless at all, guys. It's one of the things I wanted to show you guys is there's hiccups. Nobody does it perfect at any time. But here's a breakdown of kind of Adam doing it. Nothing will be highlighted. And we were coming off some injury issues, so it's not perfect. But what you're going to see here is that lateral push. He lifts the leg. He gets to that center of mass position that we're talking about here. You can see there's his thigh timing, as Josh was saying. If you look at the right leg, right arm combination, he's using that arm and shoulder to kind of load that right side. And one of his big issues in his sprints is we try to get him to relax. He kind of juts his head out, tends to get tight through the neck and trap area, which kind of allows him to get tight in the shoulder area, so we can't use our arms as freely as we want. We'll look at it one more time here. So I think the big thing for Josh and I looking back at this run of Adam, I'll play one more time. I would like to see him get a little bit more of a push off his left leg and try to get that right foot down quicker. You can see, I mean, it's in slow motion, but the leg's just up a little bit too much. I'd like him to get off that backside a little bit quicker and get the right leg down a little bit sooner. But that's a good analogy of kind of the drop step. And just so you guys know, like, we've been studying this for a very, very long time. We used to teach it multiple different ways. And just the more we broke down the really, really fast guys, or the guys that were marginally fast, or what we saw in our own athletes running faster times, we kind of migrated to doing that drop step where we get that nice lateral push, get the foot under the center mass, and transfer that energy. So anything you want to add to that segment, Josh, before we move on?
I think data has showed us too. The 1080 data has showed us that that's clearly the best way to go about that. I mean, we've worked on a lot of other start positions, and it's never as smooth or never as consistent as that start.
Yeah, and I'll second to that. While we're on the topic, is ever since we got the 1080, that's where a lot of our speed and agility work has changed, and a lot of our thoughts have changed. Is when you see the data doesn't lie. So the data has allowed us to change a lot of things and hone in on things that we wouldn't have thought of before. So the next part we're going to go over is this 60-yard setup. And the first one is if it's a laser start, okay? So if the athlete has to put their foot or leg in the beam and start in the beam, what we kind of came up with is a way to kind of hack the system, if you will, where we're allowing them to stay in the beam for as long as possible while they're continuing to get momentum or get to those good sprint positions, right, that we've kind of talked about. So I started thinking about this about 4 or 5 years ago. When we teach NFL Combine, right, we're teaching them a track start, a very specific start that they're not going to use any other time. So why can't we hack the system a little bit to give a 60-yard setup to a baseball player? And I've since we've been using this for 4 or 5 years, I've seen a lot of other people teach it. So it's not as out there as I thought it was at one point. But here's a kid that runs a 6'4" for us. So he's going to get in the stance. Whoops. Quick on the draw there. Sorry. So what he's doing here, this isn't the cleanest of starts either, but we're trying to get as much weight onto that lead leg as possible, because he's going to keep that leg in the beam or on that white line. All right. We're setting our hands up, so we're going to get good timing with the legs. And as he's driving, we're going to tell him to drive off the outside edge of his right foot. And then as he's driving off that outside edge or blade of his right foot, he's trying to throw the left knee across into aggressive crossover step. And once that foot hits the ground, it should get him under center of mass. This one's not nicely playing. All right, so we're going to get here. He's going to drive off the outside foot, so he won't break the beam until right now. So he's broken the beam, but he's already several feet out in front, maybe even a yard out in front of that starting beam. So it gives him a little bit of a head start. You can see here, all right, his thigh timing was off just a little bit. He gets it back together right about there. Okay. And then I'll go back to that starting position one more time before I show you another one. So here, I would like to see him try to keep that right heel down a little bit more. You'll see his heel comes off a little bit. He could turn his foot so he can drive off the side a little bit more. But here's an athlete that does it a lot more effectively. And I'll let Josh take this one for the breakdown because this is his video. So
you're going to see a lot of the same tendencies. This athlete starts a little bit more side on, but there's still, and you can see it a little bit in the other video, there's still a little bit of an angle to that setup. It's not a perfect side on setup. And the reason for that is just so it's easier to get that back leg across because you're leaving the front foot on the ground. You're not doing a plyo step or drop step. So a lot of issues that we see kids have with this are they're but they're staying on that lead leg a little bit too long. They're not getting them to pick and replace fast enough, which you saw a little bit on the last video. And that's going to happen just because they're pushing off that front leg rather than picking it up and putting it down. So as close as you can get to that pick up replace with this kind of start, the better. But you're also, like Kevin said, you're kind of like cheating the system a little bit with this start just because you're trying to keep that foot on the laser and get the body moving forward and covering as much ground as you can without starting that timer.
I had to start going.
So you can see right here, this athlete gets a really, really good shin angle change out of the gate. And their timing is pretty, you can go ahead and play it, Kev. The timing is pretty good right off the bat. This athlete's really, really good at it. He's very good at getting the pickup replace, but then that second step isn't very good. But off that start, his start is so effective that way because he's really good at not overdoing it with that lead leg. He gets the shin angle change. He's done right there. And now that's that second step, the thigh timing is right where we want it to be. And he's also only spraying.
Josh. Yeah, in the playoff, Josh's point earlier, if we get an athlete and we're timing them and they're consistently running poor times out of this stance and they're faster out of another stance, I'm not going to sit there and tell the athlete that he can't do a way he's more comfortable with, right? So we're not trying to fit a square peg into a round hole by any means. This is the way that's more advantageous. If they can't do it, great. We're going to teach them and clean up the other ways that they can't do it effectively. So that's another strategy that over the last 15 plus years I've kind of adopted is if they can't do it, well, there's another way to do it. But I really like this run by this athlete. Are you good on that slide, Josh?
Yep.
Okay. All right. The other way is we've seen a few different showcases where they'll put the laser gate in front of the athlete, as you can see from this picture here. When this happens, the athlete can use the drop step or they can use the 60-yard start, whichever way they feel more effective. And one of the things that we do here is we practice all these, all right? So our athletes are always running these different types of setups so they can get a feel for what are my better times on. And I really think that's important for the athlete is to practice these things consistently because there's far too often where the only time I'm running a 60-yard dash is when I'm going to a showcase or a tryout and I never do it in between. So I don't know the optimal way to set up, right? It's the same thing. If an athlete's going to go run a combine, I'm not going to just teach him that start and have him run that for that event only, right? I want to practice that so they get more comfortable with it. And we've just seen times decrease with just the practice of the repetition of the event alone, let alone accounting for the training stimulus that we're going to put on it. But for this one in particular, I really don't care if the athlete uses the drop step or the 60-yard setup because he's going to have about a yard or two buffer. So his body or his forward lean is during acceleration is what's going to break that plane. So whichever way he gets a little bit faster on those initial few steps, which once again, we can go back and we can measure that speed with the 1080 and we can see in the first step what his velocity is. And we can use that to tell the athlete which setup to be using. Hand start. There are plenty of places out there that still do hand starts. I would say most high schools, a lot of tryouts still use hand starts. This is where the athlete is timed from the finish normally, or if it's a hand start with a laser finish. The athlete can use a drop step, or they can do a push and open technique. I would venture to say just use your 60-yard setup that we've been talking about, like the examples previously have shown for this one, because once again, I'm going to get more forward movement out of that, and I don't want to have any negative movement patterns when I'm going to do this hand start, because typically they're going to start it off your first movement.
All right. So jumping into curve linear running, these are, and we'll show videos of this, but these are my big three that I like to work with all my athletes, because these are the three that I see that they have the most trouble with when we're talking about curve linear running. So my key concepts are to turn the inside leg, steer with that inside foot, the foot that's closer to the curve you're running on, stay low, keep the center of mass low, and then lean in toward the curve. So when I mean lean in toward the curve, we're trying to lean toward what the center of that semicircle, just for a reference, if we're running around a semicircle, which is, you'll see in the videos, is what we do, you're trying to lean toward the very middle point of that semicircle the whole time. So this is us using the 1080 for our curve linear running. I actually went in to the 1080 for any of you that have a 1080, and I customized this specific one. I made this curve linear run. I forget what exactly I used to make that, but it's one of the change of direction exercises. But what we're doing is we're setting up on one side of the half circle or whatever we're running around. So you can see a red cone in the back. I usually have them start there. I had this athlete start a little bit closer though, so that it had less ground to cover. I have the 1080. You can see the line where the 1080 is coming to. So I'm sitting right at where the 1080 is, videoing this. And what we're doing is we're having the 1080 pull the athlete for the first half of the curve. And as they get around the peak of the curve and make their way down toward the other side, the 1080 is then resisting them. So it's almost like a 505 change of direction type exercise on the 1080, but we're using it with curve linear running. So Kev, you can go ahead and play this video, and I'll talk about the techniques that we've been working on. So this athlete is clearly not a baseball player, but same concepts apply. So you can see this athlete, they're turning, they're steering with the inside foot. You can see how sideways that inside foot is steering him along that curve. Okay, so that's a big one that I almost start out with all of my athletes, is I make sure that they get that steer, because that steer is what's going to help keep them on the line most, in my opinion. So watch the left foot here, the left foot, the one on the curve. Watch how much turn this athlete gets in that left foot, right? And we want them to stay as close to that curve, as close to the cones as possible here. Okay, the next thing I look at is, are they leaning? All right, this athlete is clearly leaning toward the middle point in that curve the entire time. Okay, that's going to help aid with staying as close to that curve as possible and maintaining speed around that curve. All right, the last thing, stay low, right? Look at how squatted this athlete is when they're running. And that low center of mass is going to help keep them along that curve. So those three things, the steering with the inside foot, leaning toward the inside of the curve, and staying low, having a low center of mass, are the three things that I always make my athletes check to make sure that they're doing. And I'll play this video feedback to them after every single rep that they take if they need it, until they kind of understand what it should feel like and what it should look like.
All right, so we'll dive more of this in part two, but to kind of wrap up this part one talk, we are later this year in September going to offer a in-person mentorship. If you want to learn any of these techniques and more, you can scan that code, look at the mentorship page, and dive into it. If you see something you want to join, feel free to email us if you have any questions about it. But we'd love to have you guys here in Cincinnati to learn from us and learn things that we're doing here. This is our You can find us at ProFORCE SP on Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook. There is my email. That's our website at ProFORCESP.com. And if there are any questions for this segment, I think Ola's going to hop on here. But outside of that, like we said, we'll touch a lot more on the acceleration techniques, max velocity techniques. Next talk is going to be a lot more data, a lot more in depth. So looking forward to sharing that stuff with you guys. But we wanted to get this baseball specific stuff kind of cleared out of the way so we could dive more into traditional speed training and how we use those techniques more specifically for baseball. So thank you guys for joining the call or watching this afterwards. Look forward to hearing from you guys.
Excellent, gentlemen. Like Kevin was saying, if there's any questions, please feel free to write them in the chat here. You could send them directly to all or to either myself or Adam.
Yeah.
QR code.
Real quick. Yeah. Can you put the QR in? Yeah. Perfect. Go ahead, Ola. You can ask the first question.
Yeah. I'm always interested in trial and error because that curvilinear run is applicable to a wider audience than baseball per se. Could you share a little bit on some of your trial and errors in terms of setting that up, and what was the deciding factor or factors in terms of how you ended up placing the sprint and how you actually did that? Because I think that could be helpful, because I know people, for instance, in basketball have been asking or wondering about those questions, because you see a lot of those curvilinear runs and cuts. Look at Steph Curry, for instance, how he's coming off different screens, for instance.
Yeah, definitely. So when we started doing the curvilinear running with the 1080, I started actually doing it with our football players, some of our defensive ends, just so they could work on that kind of that curvilinear run to get around the line. And it works, like you said, really well with a lot of other sports, specifically baseball, because they're going to be curvilinear running base paths if they're running multiple bases at a time. So when I started that, I knew that I wanted to find a way to force them to really hit those three key points that we're trying to talk about. The best way to do that was to pull them into the curve. So my thought process behind that was to set up the 1080 at the peak of the curve and have the 1080 pull them at a at a faster pace than what they would be running. So they get an assistance at the first half of the curve. And that forces them to use those 3 points to stay along that curve. And then it's resisting them on the way down so they can kind of feel that feedback. If they get a good resistance from it, then they're doing a good job of staying along that curve and hitting those 3 points. So that was the setup, and the thought process has worked really, really well for us when we teach that curvilinear run. The one that didn't work so well was moving from the outside peak of the curve to the very middle of the curve. We tried it just to see if the 1080 would be able to bring them to the curve and help them stay along the curve the whole time. Really, all I did was just the line got in the way. There was no real resistance because the line is staying the same length the entire way around if the curve is set up the right way, because every point's going to be the same distance from the middle of the curve to the outside edge of the curve. So that's something I literally tried it for maybe 2 runs and I was like, yeah, this isn't working. We got to go back to the other one. They're getting more out of that one anyway, just because of more so the feedback that they're getting for that. Oh my gosh, what's the word? More the feedback they're getting for that body corrections that they need to go through when they're running around that curvilinear run.
Yeah, and also if you're pulling them towards the center of the turn, you're actually helping them in that lean. Yeah,
and that was the idea, was to actually help them feel that, and that's why I wanted to do that. But it ended up just getting in the way. The belt, the change. I used a change of direction belt for that one, and the belt just kept sliding up their torso and getting in the way of the arms, and it became more of a hassle than something that actually helped them.
Yeah. And it follows a little bit of how we're thinking about alpine skiing, because there we're actually pulling them out of the turn, so they actually have to fight that to be able to. There are greater forces there, but we're pulling them out of the turn, so you have to generate a force towards the center of that turn. So we're
Yeah,
actually
exactly.
so we're using the same thing, the same principle, but we're not having them obviously ski or move, but we're thinking that horizontal pull to actually create that lean and generate that horizontal force to the center of the turn. So it's the same principle or thought process, even though you're not skiing or running in
Yeah.
doing so. Yeah. No, excellent. And you pointed to it that you will come back with some more data next time, and I think that would be wonderful. And just kind of like call it a preview. Because you said you looked at data to determine what were some good technical execution of the start. What in particular did you look at, and how did you look at the metrics to decide what was a good quote unquote starting technique is probably the best. What was your criteria, or how did you look at the data there? If you don't mind sharing that.
If you just go back into the web app afterwards,
Yeah.
and then it's just easier to break down the segments. Like you can look at it. I could drop markers at 5 yards out, 10 yards out, or anywhere in between. So you can count the steps or the force production curve. And you can see at what velocity they're at each of those peaks. And then you can just kind of make a nice judgment call of, okay, well, we're at a higher rate of speed off 1 step and 2 steps. Because I mean, by the time most of these athletes are within 10 yards, we're over 80% of our max velocity, right? So one of the things we'll talk about in the next talk, but I mean, I like the big thing we tried to work on this year with the one guy who was in the picture was Adam Engel, is trying to get him to peak speed or as close to his peak speed within 20 yards, because then he's going to have to start the braking process of sliding. So a lot of these athletes hit their peak speeds at 30 or 40 yards, right? But I want him to try to get there as quickly as possible to that 20 segment, because now he's going to start to think about decelerating if he's going to round the base, if he's going to break into a head first slide, if he's going to go into a normal slide. So just using data feedback like that, like being able to break it down. Or like I did a whole consulting project with a local college here. We did everybody pre and post. And I broke it down for the coaches as to here is their speed at 2 steps, here is their speed at 5 yards, 10 yards, 20 yards. And so the coaching staff could see that and use that as a gauge of, and it's exactly what you think, right? So like my short stops are the best people within a 5-yard box of acceleration and speed, right? And then as I got out a little bit, the results became a little bit shocking to the staff because they were a little bit faster, some athletes, than what the coaching staff thought. But I mean, I think if you just back up and take the time to dive into the data and what the data is telling you, then you can easily just see, and we can put some of those graphs into the next PowerPoint as well, so you guys can see that. But that's where it really becomes interesting, and it's kind of your checks and balances at the end of the day.
No, I think you bring up a great point. It's like that's a good metric. What kind of percentage of your max speed do you actually assume when you need it, right? Because then it becomes very relevant. And we were doing actually a study that it's slightly different, but it's the same principle. Because if you're doing, say, a rotational pull or a swing, you can record max velocity or power in that swing, but actually where is it happening relative to impact? Because you're talking about when you need it. It doesn't matter if it happens way after, right?
Yeah, I mean,
so you're normalizing basically to the environment that they actually needed it.
Yeah, I mean, for Adam Engel to hit peak speed at 30 to 40 yards does him no good on the playing field. It might help him when he's running down a ball for 30 to 40 yards, but when we're talking on a base path, like I need him to hit peak speed or be super fast within that 20-yard window. So.
Yep. No, and then that's, you know, that's what I was after too, is like, how do you use that metric? So basically position as a function of time and how quickly do you get there, and what is that percentage of your relative max then, or your max? No, I think that's, yeah, nice application of the data for sure.
Kevin and
Adam?
Josh, I got a question we got from the chat here. We've talked about this. I know I've talked about this to other customers, but do you guys ever utilize the 1080 sprint with the pitchers? Anyway, like, did you not just linear running or like off the mound? Have you ever done anything with that yet or explored it?
I think the only thing we've ever used it for is like single leg lateral broad jump measurements, or single leg broad jump measurements, or just double leg broad jump measurements. I've never used it for the upper half.
Yeah.
So, sorry, not really.
No, that's fine. I know some had, well, the big thing is obviously you have a line attached. So if you are on the mound and you want to do pulling that athlete one direction or another, you just have to make sure it doesn't run into their legs, any of their body parts. So I've seen people line up on the mound, pulling it retro and laterally to give them a different feeling. But other than that, that's what I've seen.
Good question here good question. I know it might be difficult to do within the 1080 sprint, but have you examined any relationships between linear versus curved linear speed? 10-yard linear versus 10-yard curved linear?
I don't think we've compared any of those graphs, have we, Josh?
No, we haven't. I mean, those graphs are on two different kind of, I guess, mechanisms per se. So we have one, the curve linear runs on a change of direction style graph, and then the obviously the linear graph is just a linear speed graph. So it'd be interesting to compare them, but we haven't really done it yet, just because one's changed direction and one's not.
And also, if you think about, one of them would be a constant resistance or assistance, that being linear speed, whereas a curve linear, the way that you've set it up, there will be portions assisted and portions resisted. So there will be obviously some sort of percentage, could be some percentage difference there.
Yeah, I saw they just posted, could you look at it from a time-wise perspective? And you could. I know we haven't put a gate specifically at the 10-yard mark on a curve linear run. I suppose you could. But for most of the athletes on the curve linear portion, they're losing their speed or slightly decelerating when they hit the apex. So, I mean, if you were just comparing 10 yards and 10 yards, it would just be, you're just accounting for a slight lean. Now, if you did a 10-yard increment over the apex, like from the 5-yard leading up to the apex, 5-yard after the apex, that's something I've never thought about or looked at, but you could possibly compare that to their 10-yard time and see if that correlates. But the problem you have in baseball is every time I round a base, it's never the consistent same curvilinear path. Like, you hope it is, but there's so many variables in when did I find the ball? When did I decide I'm going to the next base? I don't know if that would be a true time measurement, but it'd be something interesting worth looking at, I think.
Yeah, because then it kind of brings up that change of direction deficit, right? You do a 505 versus a 10-meter sprint, and you're looking at what is that direction change costing you, so to speak.
Yeah.
If there is a cost. But you hear, for instance, track and field athletes hoping that they don't get the inner lane right in a 200 meters, whereas the outer lanes are more preferred. So that has to do with the running radius that you have in the turn.
Yeah.
Which you're pointing to here, because the radius will differ between different ones in real life.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, gents. Any other questions, Adam?
No, that's all I had coming in. Good stuff, guys. Thank you very much for your time. So as a reminder, next week, same time, same place, there will be a different link. So you do need to register. Again, if you have not registered, you'll have to register on the website at 1080motion.com, and we will see you next time. So thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Josh. You guys were awesome. This is some really good content. So thank you for your time and all the effort you put into it. So Ola, I'll see you later. Everybody, thank you again. Make speed happen.
All right. Take care, guys.